Just so you know, you're not muted.
Okay. Start. Section 13D.021, due to the declared local health pandemic. For the record, my name is Andrea Rubenstein, and I am the chair of the Charter Commission's Public Safety Work Group. I will now call this meeting to order and ask the clerk to call the roll so that we may verify the presence of a quorum.
Commissioner Barry Clegg.
Here.
Commissioner Al Giroux-Isaacson.
Here.
Commissioner Andy Kozak.
Here.
Commissioner Matt Perry.
Here.
Commissioner Lyle Schwarzkopf. Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Andrea Rubenstein.
Here.
There are 6 members present.
Let the record reflect we have a quorum. We will now proceed to our agenda, a copy of which was posted for public access to the city's legislative information management system, which is available at lims.minneapolismn.gov. And we have it on our chat, the agenda, for anybody who needs to refer to it. I'll begin by the adoption of the agenda. Commissioners, the agenda for today's meeting is before us. May I please have a motion to adopt the agenda?
So moved, Giroux-Isaacson.
Is there a second? We have a proper motion before us. Is there any discussion before the clerk calls the roll? Hearing none, shall we call the roll?
Commissioner Barry Clegg.
Aye.
Commissioner Al Giroux-Isaacson.
Aye.
Commissioner Andy Kozak.
Aye.
Commissioner Matt Perry.
Aye.
Commissioner Lyle Schwarzkopf.
Aye.
Commissioner Andrea Rubenstein.
Aye.
There are 6 ayes and the motion passes.
And the agenda is adopted. Item 1 on the agenda is an introduction and parameters review for our work group. And I wanted to make a brief introduction. We've already been introduced in the roll call, so we won't need to repeat our names again. But I just wanted to say that it is clear from the email comments we've received to date, the public forums, all the publicity and all the commenting that's been going on, that George Floyd's murder has us also in the spotlight. While there is universal agreement that it is now time to reform the police department, reasonable minds clearly differ, and opinions are very strong on the means to do that. I think about the 10+ years I've been on the Charter Commission, and another clear perspective appears, that we are all about providing opportunity for all voices to be heard, about respect for all points of view, and we have a goal that is a well-grounded, and thoughtful consideration of the issues before us. The issue before us is a big one, but one thing that stands out for me anyway is that we should take that August 21 deadline very seriously, because this is another thing we have been all about, and that is to do it right, even if we have to only have a few weeks to do it. I personally don't want to be seen as obstructing reform unless we have a very good reason to do it. And so I'll move on now to agenda item number 1, which is parameters. I thought the first thing we should do is figure out what it is we are supposed to be doing. And I had a couple of thoughts about that. It seems to me that our tasks are to begin with data collection and research. Move on to looking at review of the work that we did in 2018, because that's relevant to what we're doing now. We should also synthesize all the comments, all the responses, all the data and research that we've received. And I would say that then we should make a recommendation, including consideration of substitute language if we think that's appropriate. I would anticipate that we follow the same kind of format that we did in 2018, which is to prepare a report for Charter Commission review in time for the August 5th meeting. There's also a whole list of research and data that we can be collecting that I hope we'll collect, including the materials we've requested from the City Council as to what they relied on in drafting the amendment, and various reports that have been mentioned from time to time that I hope will be included. We're also looking at a legal analysis, and I know that the City Attorney's Office is working on that. Anybody have any thoughts or suggestions or questions about this work plan? Okay, it's a daunting task.
I have a comment.
Okay, sorry. Go ahead.
Yep. So I understand your desire to meet the August 21st deadline, but you also said something in there that I said at the last meeting, that we need to do it right. And so what I would like to do is have the group at least discuss the option that we keep things open, so that if we do need to go past the date for which the August 21st date works, that we can do it in order to do it right. I mean, when we did things back in 2018, we wanted to do it right again, and we did not necessarily follow the council's aggressive timeline that they put themselves under. So I'd like to have the group at least have a discussion about that. And it can be as simple as saying that we hold open the ability to do that if necessary.
I totally agree with you. I think this is going to be something we're going to be constantly revisiting in the next couple of weeks.
So if I may, just in response to that, one of the things that I can envision when we have community input, and we all got the emails that talked about people wanting to be engaged and so forth. I think there are going to be, what we're going to find, I'm speculating on this, of course, is that not only will issues be brought up that we've already received through the emails, but we'll also be getting new input from the public hearings that we hold, and they may require additional research that we need to do based on what the comments that are being made. Thanks.
Thank you. Commissioner Giroux-Isaacson, you had your hand up.
Yes, I agree with you, Chair, that we should try to meet the deadline that the City Council has asked. I know that it was a 12-0 vote to send this to us, and I believe there's a majority of the City Council that would like for us to be able to respond back to them by the deadline. Now, that only gives us a month, and I'm not sure if that's possible, but I agree with you that I think under these circumstances that we should do everything we can to answer next month at our meeting. And if we can't, then we need to at least let the public know what else we need to research in order to either approved or to make a substitute amendment or to reject. So I think we need to be clear with that, and I know we have later on the agenda, the second part of the agenda is approving the work plan and the timeline. So just to get back a little bit on the first line about reviewing parameters, I'd like to see some 911 data on the last 3 years on what would be considered a response for law enforcement and what would be a response for public safety and violence prevention. You know, if we can get some data to show how many calls would a non-licensed police officer go to under this new agreement versus how many would still need to be answered by law enforcement. That'd be very helpful if we can look at that data. Also study some of the legality of the restriction of new department director, the background that he, or they will have law enforcement experience or will have non-law enforcement experience in community services. I'd like to study that a little bit to see if that's something that we can actually do. And if we can do it, we still need to study, you know, is that a good thing to do or not? And then, you know, if we as commissioners have suggested, and this might be a question for Chair Clegg, if we have proposed our own suggested alternative, would that be something that we would work as the whole charter, or is that something this task force would do?
Before Chair Clegg, I'm sorry, I don't want to interrupt you. Before Chair Clegg answers that question, I just wanted to say that I listened to the press conference that the city council members conducted a couple of weeks ago, and they mentioned a comprehensive 911 report. And so I agree with you, that's going to be important for us to see, and I hope we can get a copy of it. Chair Clegg, you had your hand up?
I did. As we discussed the other day, there would be 4 motions. One of 4 motions would be in order at our August 5th meeting. One would be to approve the proposed amendment. One would be to substitute an amendment. 3 would be to reject the proposed amendment. And 4 would be to notify the council that we are taking the extra time allotted to us by statute. So any of those 4 would be in order at our August 5th meeting. As to who could propose a substitute, Commissioner Abbott already has, as you've seen. Any individual commissioner could propose a substitute, or groups of commissioners could work together if they chose to do so. And we as a work group could do so, if that were the consensus.
Commissioner Sandberg had a question.
Oh, it wasn't a question. Well, sort of a question. So could we, in fact, is August 5th our drop dead date to respond to council? Or could we take 2 or 3 days more if we had to? I mean, we could call a special meeting. What is our drop dead date, Commissioner Clegg? Or Ms. Bashoon? I don't know.
Or City Clerk Casey Carl would know.
Okay.
Commissioner, the reason that the August 5th deadline has been identified is because you may recall at our special meeting last week, I mentioned the City Council took several actions in getting this proposal in front of the Charter Commission, one of which was to suspend its rules for a joint referral, both to the Charter Commission and to its Policy and Government Oversight Committee. The Policy and Government Oversight Committee is set to meet on August 6th. So the regular meeting of the Charter Commission set for August 5th would literally be the day before. Action by this body could be directly referred to the Policy and Government Oversight Committee meeting for the next day. That body then, the way the council operates, would formulate a recommendation on what to do, if anything, if this body were to submit its report. And that would then go to the full City Council for its regular meeting the following Friday, which I don't have the calendar in front of me, but I believe that's Friday, August 14th. And that is the last day for them to take action so that we can get the entire ordinance finalized, published in the paper as required by law, and submitted to the county by the statutory deadline of August 21st so that it could be submitted to the ballot.
So what I hear you saying, Mr. Clerk, is that, okay, they need a week they need a week to, in fact, after their approval, allow for the publication and so forth. So that August 14th, instead, we always hear the 21st, but it's really not the 21st in a sense. It's really the 14th for the City Council. So technically, we could reschedule some meetings, and they could reschedule one of their meetings, and we could have a few extra. I'm just trying to see how much time we actually have. That's what I'm thinking.
Commissioner, I think that in all of my planning, I have started with the hard deadline of August 21st. We have to have an ordinance accepted by the council if they choose to submit a question to the voters. They could opt not to submit a question, but they don't have that choice until after this body acts, as Chair Clegg has said. So once this body does act, the council needs to decide what action it will take if it chooses to submit any question, whether it's original question or a substitute recommended by this body. It has to take that action. That action goes to the mayor. The mayor has 5 days under the charter to consider that action, and then we have to publish it in the paper, and then we have to file it. So the 14th really is pretty much the last day that the council could take any formal action in order to meet that deadline of August 21st.
Casey, this is Carol. Is it possible that the POGO committee could have a special meeting set up at a later date, like Tuesday the 11th? I'm just throwing that out.
Yeah, the POGO committee could be moved. The council meeting cannot.
Yes, okay.
Thank you. Barry, your hand's up again.
Another question for City Clerk Casey Carl. What would be the last date that the Charter Commission could submit a charter amendment on its own? Not the City Council proposed amendment, but a Charter Commission submitted amendment.
Any questions to be submitted for the November 2020 general election are due 74 days before the date of that election.
Understood. But I'm building in the council cycle that would take them to draft the ballot language, et cetera. So
yep.
By what date would we have to get a proposed amendment to the council for them to draft ballot question language by August 21st?
Typically, that would take at least 2 cycles. So that would be by the end of July in order for them to refer to their committee and their attorneys to draft ballot language. That would come back at the same timeline, August 14th, is when they'd have to take their final action to submit anything to the ballot for November this year.
Thank you.
Commissioner Metzke had a suggestion or question. I thought if it's okay with you, Jenna, I would just read it. Can we get a flow chart presented so there is a clear understanding of what officers do, the various divisions and tasks, so we get a clear picture of what they do and all the areas they cover? More going on than just patrol. Barry, is your hand up again? Or is that the same?
No, sorry, I didn't lower it.
Oh, that's okay. Any other comments, questions?
Is this things that we would like to have research done on? I'm sorry. I raised my hand without being
Oh,
acknowledged.
no, that's okay. I'm not sure I understood your question.
Is this part of the agenda where we are talking about things that we would like to have research done on?
Yes.
Okay. So let's see. I would like to know, we've heard about Camden, New Jersey quite a bit, but I'd like to know across the United States where other cities have done this and get some details. It sounds like Camden, New Jersey, for example, this is an example, has done something about their police department in their city but it's not exactly what is being proposed by the city council. So I'd like to have a survey of what's happening across the nation with getting rid of police departments and what the details are behind that. The other thing I'd like to know is to what degree other partners in the criminal justice system have been consulted about the effect of the proposal and how they will function. So the police department is interacting with other partners. To what degree would this impact them? I don't think that question has been really answered, or I don't think it's been asked and it hasn't been answered.
Thank you. I would also like to at least have available to us, which isn't hard to do, the MPD 150 report, which has a lot of history in it. I think it would be useful for us to see the collective bargaining agreements with the Police Federation, even though I know it's not in effect right now. The settlement agreement with the Minnesota Department of Human Rights, that should be relevant to what we're looking at. And I imagine that other things will come up as we go along. Barry, you raised your hand?
Yes, I did. I think we might also want to have a conversation with Chief Arredondo. We might have specific questions for him. I know Commissioner Jero Isaacson had suggested that we try and do that tomorrow, but I thought tomorrow was pretty full already, so maybe we could just do that as this group, perhaps at our meeting next week, if the chief is available.
Thank you. Is it anybody else? Matt?
Mr. Kozak has raised his hand, Chair.
Okay, thank you. I can't see it for some reason. Commissioner Kozak?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I think we have. Maybe we should look at the bigger picture here. Looking at the proposed amendment that was sent, it really has 3 or 4 parts to it, and we should break that down and then see on each part, much of which has already been mentioned. The first piece, of course, is defunding the police, and I think someone mentioned that we have to get some information where that's happened elsewhere. For example, in Camden, New Jersey, and I've done a lot of reading on Camden, New Jersey, and it is a whole different situation than what we're facing here. Not to mention a city that's about the size of Maple Grove. But the second piece, and I think the piece that has gotten very little attention, is we're seeing a revised version of what we had 2 years ago. And I know we did a lot of, as Andrea mentioned, we did a lot of research back then, and we need to bring those materials back. Because basically, to me, the fundamental change is you're going to take away from the mayor the almost plenary power the mayor has over the police department, and at least have the city council share. And the third piece of it, the new department, the Department of Public Safety, Violence Prevention, once that's in place, because if there's going to be a law enforcement component, it's going to be answerable to that department, and it's the city council, not the mayor, who's going to be effectively the executive power in that. So that's a major part of this that I don't even think the public has a real clear understanding of what that all means. And So I think we need to break it down to those pieces, and then that's how we should be approaching this thing. And then there's the final piece we should take a look at that I don't think has been mentioned. There's a lot of reforms that we've read about in the paper that people have proposed. The legislature's talking about some things. People around the country or jurisdictions around the country are proposing reforms within the department, and there's probably a dozen of them. And some of them I know have been, at least to some measure, have been tried by this department. But I think what can the city council by ordinance do without having to mess with the charter, without having to change the charter? And from what I've been reading, most of the stuff I read, you can enact, some of it requires possibly changes in state law, but you can enact many, many things without having to change the charter. And so I think that's another topic we should be discussing before we put this matter to rest one way or the other.
Thank you, Commissioner Kozak. I totally agree with you. That was later on the agenda. You've completely stolen my thunder, but I'm happy you have. Commissioner Perry raised his hand, I think.
Oh, is it still up?
No? Okay.
I'll take it down, but since it was up, I'll just echo Mr. Kozak's, Commissioner Kozak's comments. I think one of the things that I've heard from different sectors is that and I'm not as versed in this as maybe some of the other committee members or work group members are, that there are reforms that have been proposed in the past that really have never been tried. And there's an ability to do it without the charter. I don't know why they were not, why they weren't tried. It could have been the council and the mayor's office at the time, and times have changed. So it would be nice to look at different, some of the different groups that have proposed changes to the department to see what was proposed and if that requires a charter change. So I would just add on to Commissioner Kozak's fourth element.
I just wanted to add a caveat, which is our narrow mission for this working group and for the amendment is to vote it up, vote it down, or create substitute language. The charter isn't supposed to have a lot of detail about reforms and everything else. And though it's important for us to have as much background as possible, I would worry about getting very bogged down and certainly in making suggestions about reform when we only have a month, maybe, or more, maybe, and have to focus pretty squarely on the amendment language. So I don't mean to disagree with you, but I just raised that as a caveat, given our task and our timeline. Chair Clegg, you had your hand up?
Yes, and this is more of a reminder to us than anything else. I think one of the last items on the agenda is for us to create some questions that we might be able to ask council members and the mayor tomorrow. And as we go through, we're thinking up some interesting things. So let's, instead of just packing that all at the end, if you think of something as we go along that would be a good question, let's make a note of it. What I anticipate doing tomorrow is that the questions that this group develops might be the 4 or 5 or 6 lead-off questions, and then to the extent there is still time, we would let other individual commissioners ask questions as well. But let's keep doing that as we work through the agenda tonight, so we're not trying to remember what we talked about at the end.
Thank you. Commissioner Kozak?
Oh, yeah, thank you, Madam Chair, again. Your caveat is well taken. And what I didn't want to get into an extended discussion about the relative merits of different reforms. However, the point I wanted to make was the only thing I see in the charter that is that it says you have to have a police force and you have to have a certain number, a ratio of population to officers. But, and that's it. And we are, as far as that ratio, we are so far above that right now. We're at least 100 officers over that. So the point I want to make was so much can be done without having to change the charter. And what else does the charter require that can't be done just simply by ordinance? And so I don't think we want to get into a long discussion, but the charter, you're right, the charter is not very specific except in that 0.0017 ratio, but it just remind people that you don't need to change the charter to change the culture of the police force.
Commissioner Giroux-Isaacson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think that the question about whether City Council has enough power or not really is at the core here. I mean, this amendment is coming from the City Council wanting to have more of a say on the police department. And I think our charter is pretty clear that it's the mayor who commands the police department. And I know that there has been history of times where the City Council has attempted to insert its legislative prerogative and force the police department into a policy. The body cameras was something when I was on the PCOC, the Police Conduct Oversight Commission, was something that was worked with City Council, was moved forward, and then it was ignored by a large part by the officers. So there are other instances in history where the City Council has tried to make a change, create a policy, but they don't see themselves, and they've been even told in their past that by the city attorney that they cannot directly tell the police department what to do. I think it was a use of force policy that the City Council tried to put in place. And so the thinking from City Council is if they wanted to pass a rule that said that the police officers could not do chokeholds, that they couldn't do that right now, that would be the mayor. And so City Council wants to be able to do that. And I'm not saying whether this is right or wrong, the position, or if I agree or don't agree, but I think that it's pretty clear that this is what they're asking for the charter to change so that they can have more power in what they do. So the study really needs to be, are there city councils out there that have direct, and I think we did some of this, as a commissioner mentioned earlier in the 2018 analysis that we can point to. Is there any data, or is Minneapolis going to be the first city to ever try it this way? Which is another question that the voters would decide, right? We all have our opinions, but the voters at the end of the day would have a say after all this information is put out there. So if we can do studies on that to see what's out there, if anybody else is doing this, that's great, but it might be difficult to do that. And then to hear from the City Council exactly what powers they're looking for and what they don't have now and what they do, and then have the city attorneys tell us whether the City Council can do this now through the charter today with their legislative powers. Can they write a policy and say, Chief, you have to follow this? Or, and then if the mayor doesn't agree, can they override the veto? And does the police chief have to follow that? I think that's a question we need to know in the process of studying this.
Thank you. Commissioner Kozak, is your hand up again? No?
No, my hand is down.
Okay. Are any other hands up? I see none. I think that the next few weeks, every meeting we have, we're probably going to be revisiting some of this, which is a good thing. But if we have no other questions or comments, I think we can move to item 2 on the agenda, which is a discussion of our work plan and timeline, including the time and date of the second public hearing or of second public hearing. And I felt quite panicked when I looked at the calendar, and we've made an executive decision, so to speak, to have a weekly meeting of this group, because we need a weekly meeting. But when I look at the calendar, after today, we have July 14, 21, 28, and August 4. And so what I wanted to know is how the group feels about if we're going to stick to the timeline, if we can stick to the timeline, which I realize is a different question. What do we think about trying to spend between now and July 21, continuing to collect research and review that research, as well as, of course, all the comments that we're receiving and whatever we receive in the public hearing? That sounds okay. Then July 28th would be spent reviewing a draft report already and figuring out what we want to go into it. And then August 4th would be finalizing our recommendation, including drafting any substitute language if we decide we want to do that. And I suggest a draft report because that's what we did back in 2018, and I think it was very effective and very helpful. So any thoughts on that?
Madam Chair, this is Commissioner Jerome Isaacson. I'm sorry, I didn't raise my hand. So are we going to talk about I like the timeline, but where's the second public hearing?
That was the next question. But first, Commissioner Schwarzkopf had raised his hand.
We're going to have a lot of people who want to testify, and I think we need to have more than just one. We still have to
Commissioner Schwarzkopf, yeah. We weren't able to hear what you said.
Chair Rubenstein.
Yeah.
You may need to turn off your camera.
I don't know if you heard that, Chair Rubenstein. The little bit that I could pick out, I think, is that Commissioner Schwarzkopf was saying that it may be important to consider more than 2 public hearings.
I agree, yeah.
Yep.
I assume that will be Chair Clegg.
On Thursday. We're going to have a little.
Where we? I'm not sure where we are, but I know that Carol Bashoon has raised her hand.
I was just going to say, Casey had put together a calendar a while back, and I know we've made some changes to it. One of the possible additional public hearing dates was set for July 29th. However, that is a Wednesday, and I believe that Barry was suggesting that as part of that motion that was approved, that we have a hearing at a different time and maybe a different date. So I just wanted to throw that out. But that was originally one of the thoughts that Casey had, that the Wednesday, July 29th, but that is a Wednesday.
The only problem I see with that is that we're going to be pretty far along in our work.
I would suggest we have a second public hearing roughly a week, not a week exactly, because I think we do want to do it at a different time, but roughly a week after the first one.
So based on Chair Clegg's proposal, that would be sometime in the week running from July 20th to, say, July 28th?
Correct.
That makes sense to me.
Madam Chair, this is Commissioner Jerome Isaacson. I agree. That sounds like a good, time to have a second public hearing. I would like for us to consider extending an invitation to the City Council so that they can participate in hearing the public comments. I know they punted the ball to us. They skipped their public hearing, which they should have had. But I would like for us to invite them so that they can sit in the public hearing with us and listen to the public as well.
Thank you. I think that's a good idea. Commissioner Schwarzkopf? Unfortunately, we still can't hear you.
Commissioner Schwarzkopf, it might be easier if you were to call into the meeting rather than using the computer at this point. No, I'm sorry.
Commissioner Schwarzkopf, I think you don't have a good enough Wi-Fi signal wherever you are. If there's a place in your house that has better Wi-Fi, you should go there. Otherwise, do as Clerk Casey Carl suggests and call in using a number.
Thank you. Commissioner Perry?
Yep. So I want to, so the timeline sounds fine for me as well, but I do want to hold out the ability to have a third public hearing if necessary. I was just struck by the amount of input we got, and I think people really want to be heard. And as Al said, I think they feel they kind of got cheated out of a public hearing and would like to be heard. That was one of the themes that I would say came through in a lot of the emails.
Yeah, thank you. Would it make more sense to set up 3 public hearings now and let people know, or because then they have more notice?
I think so.
I agree.
This will also become clear when we see how many people sign up for the public hearing that is next week. I mean,
Right.
it could be that people will send their email and be done, or it could be that we get 300 people who want to testify, and that'll inform our decision as to how many public hearings we should have. But I would suggest we at least get the second one on the calendar today and hold open the opportunity for a third one.
Sounds good to me. Anybody else with their hand up? We're still waiting for Commissioner Schwarzkopf. Meanwhile, let me go quickly to, we can go back to item 2 when Commissioner Schwarzkopf can reach us, but on agenda item 3 was meant to be a discussion of reviewing a draft communication to the neighborhood and community organizations. And the city clerk's office has already nicely taken care of that. You've all received a copy, so I think that unless anybody has a comment or question, I don't think there's anything more we need to discuss.
I did not see that copy. How was it distributed?
I can't.
Commissioner Perry, I sent out an email just a few days ago over the holiday weekend and attached a copy of that, but I will see while we're waiting here if I can attach it in the chat here just as a reminder again. And I will share with you that on behalf of Chair Clegg and this work group, Chair Rubenstein, I sent that out to the NCR Department of Communications departments using their networks and contacts to distribute that out broadly through the community.
Okay, so someone just mentioned that it came through NCR today. I did see the NCR notice, that's fine. I'm fine with it.
Chair Clegg?
I did not have my hand up, I don't think.
Oh, okay. Anybody else have a hand up? Seeing none. Once again, going back to when Commissioner Schwarzkopf reaches us. Meanwhile, I think we're ready to move on to agenda item number 4, which is going to be a lot shorter than I thought because Commissioner Kozak already covered what I was planning to say. Again, just for a brief summary, that the amendment, the draft amendment already basically does a lot of different things, but it has 4 main components, which is to eliminate the police department and create a new department, to create the new position of director, to eliminate the minimum number of police officers, and to transfer supervisory authority to the city council from the mayor. So my question is, and maybe it's already been answered since Commissioner Kozak raised it, how do we want to proceed? Do we want to break our analysis and our recommendation down into these component parts as well? And especially number 4, is this so similar to what we reviewed 2 years ago? Do we even need to start all over again with that? Chair Clegg?
I don't think my hand is up. Is it showing as up?
I think maybe you just have to lower it. So I'm wondering if I hear consensus that we might want to look at the component parts. Commissioner Kozak?
Andrea, I think you raised the question, is the provision that contemplates having the council take over, it actually is a more, I think it does need more study other than just what we did 2 years ago, because the context is so different now. As I recall, the 2018 proposal, they were going to share power. Well, this sounds like the council, given they're setting up the new department, which doesn't even insist that there be a police department. It says we may have a police department. So right now, it's not just sharing with the mayor, it's basically taking over. So I think it's a whole new, it is a new concept. In fact, it's more a dramatic change than what they wanted to do 2 years ago, where they were just interested in sharing with the mayor, power sharing with the mayor. But this is basically appropriating to themselves the power to run the whole operation.
Yeah, that's certainly true. I think that the research and that we did 2 years ago will be helpful, but as you said, it may not answer the question. what stood out for me 2 years ago was the fact that, based on the research that we did, that no matter what the governance structure was, didn't make any difference to the culture of the police department. Commissioner Giroux-Isaacson?
Yeah, Madam Chair, I remember that portion when we looked at the different surveys out there and feedback from residents throughout different cities in the U.S. that there wasn't really a significant change in conduct when they had shared powers, the mayor and the city council. It sounds like I'm not really sure how much research really we would be able to do unless we had alternative language. Like if we wanted to insert different pieces to this, because it's quite clear to me that this is what Commissioner Kozak said. You know, this is more power for the city council. It takes out the statement that the mayor has complete authority over the police department. So I think at the core again is I think we need to know if the city attorneys can tell us, does the city council have that power under the charter today, right? So can they legislate policies, directives to the chief of police, or can they suggest, do they make recommendations, or can they pass those and then can the chief ignore them? That is at the core of what I want to know, whether or not this fits the charter or not, because if they do have the power, then we don't need this charter and we'll vote to decline it, right? We'll reject it. If they say no, they can't, then we know clearly that this amendment attempts to change that, and the voters can decide, is it the mayor that we want to be in control or the city council to be in control? So I'm hoping we can get an answer to that before we start digging into a lot of the research. A lot of it we already did in 2018. Because for me, that would really help settle the question on whether or not this is an appropriate charter question for the voters.
It occurs to me that, again, having watched the city council press conference, there was a lot of assertion that they didn't have the authority to make policy, that when they tried, they were told by the police department that, no, that's up to us. And so I'm hoping that the materials they relied on will give us some information as to why they made those statements, and if they're correct.
And Madam Chair, sorry, this is Giroux-Isaacson. I still think, you know, let's say today the city council passes an ordinance banning some sort of police tactic. They pass it, it goes through the procedure, mayor either agrees or it's vetoed, or the council can override the veto. Let's say that happens today. It gets to the chief. Can the chief today say, no, I'm not doing that?
No, I think your points are well taken. I didn't mean to disagree.
No, I'm not disagreeing, or I just, can we get an answer to that?
I hope so.
But is it not something we know today?
This is Carol Bashoon. I briefly looked over the legal analysis from 2018, and it seemed pretty detailed. It went into the powers of the city council and the powers of the mayor and the mayor overseeing the police department. And I don't know if you would review that, if that would give you the answer. I can review it and talk to Eric Nilsson about some legal review, but that might provide the answer. I don't know if you all know where to find it. It is in our new LIMS system. I do have the number for that. I can always provide that in the chat too.
Thank you. Commissioner Kozak?
Oh, is my hand up? Well, okay, I'll put it up. Commissioner Giroux-Isaacson, I think he's on to the right question. But I think I would assume that if an ordinance is passed and the mayor signed it, ultimately the mayor is supposed to be in charge. And even if the police department doesn't like it, if the mayor likes it, they have to do what he says. I mean, to me, that's the one definitive part of the charter, that the mayor has the power. But I think, Al, I think you're on the right track. We need to get an answer to that question. And even if the council's powers are more limited than I think they are, before we send something out to the voters, I still think we need to get an idea of what exactly the council's contemplating. And that maybe gets into the question of what questions we ask them if they, in fact, do come to the meeting to answer our questions.
Chair Clegg?
Just to get to Commissioner Giroux Isaacson's question, it's 7.3A of the charter provides the mayor has complete power over the establishment, maintenance, and command of the police department. The mayor may make all rules and regulations and may promulgate and enforce general and special orders necessary to operating the police department. Except when the law vests an appointment in the department itself, the mayor appoints and may discipline or discharge any employee in the department subject to civil service rules. Just
Thank
an
you.
FYI.
Thank you, Madam Chair Giroux Isaacson. Thank you, Chair Clegg, for that. It makes it pretty clear that then this is the question, right? Should the voters decide in November whether or not they should keep the mayor in complete control, or if they have the city council, they take that out, and the city council now takes more control. It's pretty clear. So the question is, how much time are we going to spend studying this to provide viewpoints on a yes or no, or are we just going to say it's a legitimate good change to our charter, and the voters should decide? It seems pretty clear to me then that it's a question of whether or not the voters want to change that power from the mayor to the city council.
Thank you. Mr. Perry?
I don't disagree with anything you're saying, Al, but I would say that the fact that the alternative to having a police department that's in the amendment is pretty light on detail. So I think to decide whether it's ballot worthy, I think we owe it to the public to look into those details and provide some more information and research. We've already, in the earlier part of this meeting, brought up a number of issues that that were pertinent to look into. Some of those may be answered in tomorrow's Q&A with the city council people and the mayor, the authors and the mayor. But I think for me, the question isn't as simple. Part of it is simple in that get rid of the police department. So that part is pretty straightforward. And I would agree with Andy that it's pretty straightforward also that there is an attempt to have the council have control over the department, something that they tried to do in part back 2 years ago. But what's not clear to me is whether the alternative really introduces unintended consequences and what that means. And I think we have an obligation to do the review and due diligence to say, is this ballot worthy? So that's just where I'm coming from.
Thank you. Commissioner Kozak?
My hand must be stuck. But no, I don't have my hand up, but I agree with Matt. I think what your point's well taken. And
Madam Chair.
Just to reiterate what I said before, the difference between this proposal and what we dealt with 2 years ago is that was a power sharing deal. The way it would work in practice, the council would run the whole operation. The amendment, once you eliminate all the things that Barry just read, once you eliminate that, there's no real role left for the mayor. The council is going to run that department, and so I think that requires some real thought about what that actually means in the real world.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Schwarzkopf is on the phone, and he was hoping to be recognized.
Commissioner Schwarzkopf.
Madam Chair, when you listed the working off the 4 different parts of the amendment, I think that's a good idea. But at the same time, I also think we got to get a little deeper. One of the difficulties that we're now having, which the new amendment doesn't take care of, nor does the present charge take care of, and that is how do you discharge a police officer that's not doing the job right. And we need to get into that area too, I think, a little bit, because that's really what started this whole thing, and neither one of the amendments get at that.
Thank you. One of the burning questions that I have that I have already been thinking about, but makes it even clearer in this discussion, is that I want to know what the city council really, what they really want in this amendment. It was drafted in response to George Floyd's death and the, outrage all over the community and everything else that has been going on all over the community. And yet, included in there is this complete change in authority from the mayor to the city council. And I wonder if the voters are going to be interested in the police department and not who runs the police. So that's a real concern. Chair Clegg?
Before we get too far past scheduling the second public hearing, I'll just suggest we set it for the 21st of July, which is a Tuesday, and say maybe 3 p.m., or it could be later in the evening too. Should we do 6 p.m. on Tuesday the 21st?
And then would we meet before?
Yes, we would meet before.
Okay.
Yeah, I think
Barry, I think 6
p.m. is a good time.
Okay, I think we have a date and time. Commissioner Perry, you had something else? You had your hand up again?
Yes. I just...
Sorry, I need to say again.
It's a fine point, Madam Chair, but something I think and maybe it's a question for tomorrow about what the real intent is one of the things that concerns me about the amendment and this, what I think is a lack of detail, is it's basically saying there may be a provision for peace officers, and I don't know that having each council decide whether there is a force of police officers makes sense to me. That is concerning, and I think we read that in a lot of the emails that we got.
Thank you. Commissioner Gerard Isaacson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As we go through these different points of pro or against and our concerns about whether or not City Council today or City Council of the future may have a division of law enforcement services, I think those are all valid questions and concerns that the voters are going to have. I guess I'm looking at it as, is this an appropriate ballot question for November? And from here to November, can the city have that debate and get those answers to those questions, the citizens, and then each and every single one of us has the equal say, right? If there's not enough detail, if people don't like the may have a police department, if they want to have a chief of police, if they want to have law enforcement, if they don't want the city council to have more of a say, then they'll vote it down. So to me, it's an appropriate ballot question just because it does change the power structure from what it is today to what the city council wants. So that's an appropriate question, I think, for the citizens to decide. How much time we spend in investigating the pros and cons of this, I don't want that to get in the way of the deadline. So, you know, regardless of how I'm going to vote and all the questions that I have that we can talk about in the public hearings, I keep going back to, is this an appropriate ballot question for November, regardless of how much information we get on that this makes sense or that doesn't make sense. And I just keep coming back to that. I think it's an appropriate ballot question, and then let the voters go back and forth and decide in November.
Thank you. Commissioner Kozak, see your hand again.
No.
Any other comments, questions? I have a question. It's now almost an hour and a half. If we're through discussing the previous agenda item, it would be time to turn to agenda item number 5, putting together questions to be posed tomorrow at the meeting. I don't know how much time, Chair Clegg, I ask you and ask Casey Carl, how much time do we want to spend on this? Of course, we've already talked about a few questions to be asked. Do we want to talk a little bit more and then just on our own decide what we want to ask, or how do you want to do it?
What I would foresee for tomorrow is that there would be some questions that come from this group. I think we've already talked about a couple of them. One I have written down is there agreement among the proponents on the council that there would be a division of law enforcement services which would have licensed police officers, and the size of that group? My understanding is there is not consensus on those issues, but I think we should ask and find out where they are and how they intend to resolve the question if they're not currently a consensus. Secondly, I think we should have a question about this essentially takes authority away from the mayor, and in my view, it moves us a long way towards being a weak mayor system, if we aren't already. This is one of the primary charter duties that the mayor has. And is that the intent? But if other people have ideas for questions, I'd like to hear them, and then I would suggest that Chair Rubenstein and I talk tomorrow to come up with maybe a list of 4 or 5 questions that can be committee questions, and then turn it over to individual charter commissioners for questions they may have.
Madam Chair?
Yes, Commissioner Schwartz.
I would like to ask the mayor, who we invited, if they have tried to implement any of these ideas already, and have they been financed by the council if they have tried to implement these ideas?
Thank you. Commissioner Perry?
Thank you. I think the elephant in the room for some of us, and I have not heard a consistent answer. I did not watch the press conference or Madam Chair, but I have been on social media, and it seems that the question of why we have to do this in 2020 rather than 2021, after they have done their year-long engagement process is something that really needs to be put out on the table. And I'd like to hear do they have consensus around that?
Thank you. Commissioner Giroux-Isaacson?
Yes, I just wanted to know if they thought that 6 months was enough time to put together this new department and division, because if this goes in November and it's approved, it goes into effect May 1st, and so that would only give 6 months, right, to put this together. So I want to hear a little bit more about what those plans are, because it doesn't sound like a year to me. It's 6 months. Unless they start working on it now and before the November election. But I want to know if it's approved, if there's enough time really, or should we perhaps recommend a later start date for the amendment?
Oh, boy, thank you.
One thing I would just point out, Commissioner Giroux-Isaacson, is that approving this amendment would eliminate the police department as a charter department, but it could continue to exist. It just wouldn't be in the charter, so it exists at the will of the city council, essentially.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Madam Chair,
Yes, Commissioner Kozak?
this time my hand is really up.
Okay.
My question would be, and it's a bit in line with what Lyle suggested, what can they name any individual reform ideas that the council has tried to promote that were resisted by either the mayor or the department? Mm-hmm. And I think I just want to emphasize what he said. What reforms have been put in, and how many resources has the council allowed the mayor and the department to avail themselves of to have these reforms operating? And I know there's a program where at least during the daytime there's a program where a cop and a psychiatric social worker can answer calls if someone is having a mental breakdown. And I understand there was a request from somewhere to increase it to 24/7, and that request did not make it. So those are the kinds of something along those lines. What have the proposals have been out there that the mayor and the cops have tried to resist? That they have pushed.
Any other?
We've talked about this over the course of the evening, but what changes could be made without changing the charter? For example, the .0017 number applies to all employees of the police department, not just sworn officers. And the police department currently has, I think, about 175 employees who are not sworn officers. So if the number is 720 and you subtract 175, the number of sworn officers could be reduced to roughly 550 without an amendment to the current charter. So there are other things that could be done as well without amending the current charter. So I would like to hear input from both the council and the mayor on what reforms can be accomplished inside the four corners of our current charter.
Anybody else? I'd like to know, having read all the emails and seen a lot of fears from people who think we're not going to have police protection, I'd like to know what the city council intends to do to assure people that this isn't going to become, crime central #1. I don't think it is, but I'd like to know what they're going to do to make sure that people understand what this is about, so that they will be able to vote in November on something they know what it stands for. Commissioner Kozak?
What I'd suggest is that you let Commissioner Rubenstein and me wordsmith these and nudge them a little bit tomorrow, and we'll come up with 5 or so questions that can come from this body before we turn it over to other commissioners for one-on-one questions. And I would invite, when we ask these questions, I would invite both the council to respond and, give everybody like a 3-minute response, but that's not 3 minutes for each council member on the line. That's 3 minutes total. And then give the mayor 3 minutes on each question, unless there's a question that's obviously intended for one or the other.
Sounds like a very good idea.
Commissioner Gerard Isaacson?
No, I'm sorry, Madam Chair. I don't have my,
Okay.
sorry about that.
Any other comments, questions? Questions from us, questions for us?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Gerald Isaacson. I am working on some alternative suggested language proposal for this. So if there's any other commissioners interested in that, I can send it to the clerk. It's not 100% ready to go as a proposal from me. So if there's a few others that want to work with me on that, but basically I'm looking at, can we create can the charter have 2 separate departments? One that would be like the safety and violence prevention that the city council could manage as they do all the other departments, and a second which would be a division of law enforcement that would report still to the mayor. And so I'm thinking through what are some pieces that we could find a compromise and give some power to the council where they want to invest in more violence prevention and safety programs, and still have a law enforcement department that is controlled through the mayor. So if anyone's interested in that as an alternative suggestion to the city council, please let me know.
I would think we're probably all interested in it. And with that, I remind myself that Commissioner Abbott has also drafted some alternative language, and you had asked, Commissioner, whether we would be considering that, and I'd say absolutely, we would want to look at any suggestions.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments, questions?
Just a quick question for City Clerk Casey Carl. I have heard from Councilmember Fletcher indicating that he will join us tomorrow, and at least 1 or 2 others of the proponents, but I haven't heard anything from the mayor and was wondering if you had.
I have reached out to the mayor's office and asked if there was going to be attendance at the meeting. I have not heard back a definitive yes or no at this point.
Ms. Bashoon?
I just wanted to mention that we just need to be aware of the open meeting law. If we're, sending out documentation, getting groups together, if you have a quorum, then it has to be an open meeting. So those are just some considerations.
Madam Chair.
Which is why I would suggest that you send that to me, Commissioner. I'm sorry to jump in. If you send that to me, we can get that. The alternative proposal offered by Commissioner Abbott will be put into the record at tomorrow's meeting. So if you can send me something, even an outline form, the chair, Mr. Clegg, will be presenting that as part of his report at tomorrow's meeting. So for those listening, for those who are planning on attending, that's how we're going to put that into the public record. And so if you want to send that to me, I can help accommodate that for you as well.
Thank you. I'll do that.
Thank you, Casey. I'm hearing no further business. And so I believe it's safe to say we've concluded all business to come before the Charter Commission's Public Safety Work Group, and without objection, we stand adjourned.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all very, very much.
Thank you.